Keegan.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And it's a great pleasure to follow my honourable friend, the member for St Ives and the Scilly Isles. So plastic packaging and its impacts on the environment for many of us, and certainly in my case, burst into our consciousness when Sir David Attenborough put a spotlight on the impacts that our activities are having beneath the waves. And perhaps it's because we both represent coastal constituencies that really hit home. And whilst I probably don't have quite as much coast around my constituency, I do have the extremely sunny Selsey as well, the Witterings, which also have the blue flag beaches, Bracklesham Bay, Chichester Harbour itself, which is an area of outstanding natural beauty, and Bosham around my area. So it really matters to people in my constituency because the coast really matters for many, many reasons, from tourism to fishing. But plastic, I think, from those programmes, they really did cut through. And so much so that some surveys have even suggested, get this, that the British public care more about plastic pollution than even Brexit. Now, obviously, being in here, we would find that incredibly hard to believe. But apparently, now 82% of people are trying to reduce the amount of plastic packaging that they throw away. And I know from meeting people across my constituency that they feel very much the same. Everybody wants to do the right thing. And the British people, I'm always struck, are very good at trying to do the right thing. But often we confuse them with mixed messages. And the education that we give it's so difficult because we've introduced systems that are non-standardised and incredibly difficult for people to follow. The recent report from the Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, chaired by my honourable friend, the member for Tiverton, Anne Honiton, and thank you for securing this debate. It highlights the huge amount of work ahead of us if we're truly to get to grips with this issue. And I fully agree with many of the recommendations within the report. It was a very thorough report, and you and the members of that select committee are to be congratulated. I'm very happy to give way.
Just on the point you were making on, thanks for giving way, just on the point you were making on consistency across the UK and trying to have a more joined up approach. In Scotland, we're about to launch the deposit return scheme, and again, as the honourable member for Strangford has alluded to, there's maybe really good examples from across the country that we can use to actually evaluate how they work and spread them wider to see if the more benefit can be spread across the whole of the UK. Would the honourable member agree with that? I
very much welcome that intervention, and you're right, we now have an opportunity to standardise on a new scheme. Well, it's not actually a new scheme, it's an old scheme that's being brought back, but on something that we are now introducing, and I would hope that the Minister would take note of that actually we should be working together to make sure we have standardised schemes. But firstly, we need to get to grips with the current situation. As my honourable friend referred, the report rightly emphasises the current inadequacy in the monitoring of plastic usage. It impacts our ability to accurately calculate our usage. And some surveys suggest we're putting around 2.2 million tonnes of plastic packaging into the UK market each year. But we do need to do more to know exactly how much we are using. And of course our priority must be to use less plastic. There are a whole host of solutions to help us achieve this. And obviously we've seen fantastic results from the 5p plastic bag. This has led to a significant reduction in usage of the 15.6 billion bags since 2015. And there's certainly scope to extend this to other forms of packaging and products where suitable alternatives are present. And we all know there's immediate changes that can be made. The thing that always bugs me are crisps. Every packet I've bought is half empty. And, introducing some regulation on packaging so it's designed around product size instead of trying to make things look bigger would be a good start. And many shops and some supermarkets are going further. I'm very happy to give way.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and again, as the Honourable Friend has alluded to in Scotland, some of the things that they've done, we've done in Northern Ireland. Mr. Stringer, the plastic bag charge has been incredibly successful in Northern Ireland. It's really done exceptionally well, to such an extent that the reduction in use of plastic bags is, I think, is around the figure about 20 or 25%, down to that figure. Massive reduction. I think it has been successful because people want it to be successful. It's successful because children tell their parents that they must do it. And it's also been successful because ultimately they gain the saving from that money goes back into society and can help environmental projects. So there's 3 reasons for it to be successful, and really it's one we should be pushing more at.
Yes, I completely agree. But consumer behaviour, as well as being influenced by children, I think consumer behaviour, it does take a bit of time. I remember actually in London, not in my constituency home, but every time I was coming home from here late at night, I'd never have the plastic bags with me. And I'm sure many of us have done the same, but I've solved it because I've now bought one of these little fold-up bags. So I now at least always have that. And you know, eventually and the plastic reusable bottles, well, I've lost mine again today, so I don't know how many I've lost. I'm pretty sure my impact on the environment in the lost water bottles is bigger so far than what I have saved. So now I've taken to reusing this bottle, which is a plastic bottle, but I just refill it, which I think you're not supposed to, but anyway, I do. But there's plenty of, there are plenty of opportunities to move to plastic-free. As my honourable friend for St Ives said, there is still, everywhere we go, you see more and more plastic. And once you become conscious of it, that's it, you see it everywhere. But, you know, there are supermarkets that are moving to packaging-free aisles, and even the funny-shaped potatoes that my honourable friend for Strangford referred to, with a little bit of soil on. I've seen them as well, but I'm sure that's just for authenticity. Last year I opened Stansted Farm Shop, which is in my constituency. And most of their products, they've made a big thing of it because actually they have a very environmentally friendly ethos in the whole business. But most of their produce is loose, and it's drastically reduced all the plastic use. And there's certainly a future model for some products that are, you know, there's many package-free and refill shops. We have those shops where you go and refill, like the old-fashioned ways, actually. Like my grandmother used to have the glass jars with everything that was refilled. And you used to go to the shops and they used to refill them out of huge sacks. I can see the honourable member for Strangford nodding because he remembers the same. We're obviously around about the same age. But there's also an area where e-commerce could play an important role, with food being delivered in reusable boxes on a subscription model or bespoke order model. And whilst I'm on e-commerce, we do need to do something about e-commerce, because I don't know how many times you've noticed, but you order your stuff and it comes in several different deliveries, and you've got several different delivery drivers coming to your house 2 and 3 times a day. Well, maybe I'm just a prolific shopper, but sometimes they could have put them all in a more transport-friendly mechanism, and we do need to have different ways of actually, if we are moving to more online, it doesn't mean that it's environmentally more friendly, and we do need to do a lot to encourage those businesses as well. Now, the humble cucumber has been mentioned a few times before, apparently, wrapped, they have a shelf life of 15 days when chilled, but only 9 days when unwrapped. And I think this is true, because actually they go all soft if they're unwrapped, and they're really not edible. So removing plastics in some cases can increase other forms of waste. I don't think there's much of a market for a sort of end-of-life cucumber, as far as I've seen anyway. And, you know, obviously there's other forms of waste and emissions release when you include the entire carbon budget of products. And we need to make sure we get this right. I am one of the people who's still driving a diesel car. Why? Because I followed the advice and bought a diesel car, and now, of course, I can't get rid of it. So, you know, this is... And actually, if you look at what happened with diesel cars, I think the market share went from something like 14% to 65%. Everybody followed the advice. We all followed the advice. And then we realised the advice was wrong, so we must get the advice right. However, there are many alternatives, as the Honourable lady suggested, such as seaweeds, potato starch wrapping, and this innovation will come the more that the government incentivise innovation. Yeah. Most of us have the ambition to use less single plastic, and many people are now using alternatives. And I try to use less in my day-to-day life. I mentioned my water bottle, but I did also give up plastic for Lent, and it is a nightmare. It is incredibly different. You have to change your whole life for 6 weeks. So I'm not. In fact, I chose an easier option this time, because it was so difficult to give up for 6 weeks. So we need to make this easy, because consumers, we are consumers, and we simply won't do it if it's incredibly difficult and everybody has to carry lots of glass jars around and you know, things that perhaps don't fit into everyday life. I'm very happy to give way.
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but when I'm sitting here, I'm just listening to the Honourable Lady refer to consumer behaviour. I was saying to my colleague and friend left-hand side here, probably the greatest scud of today's modern age is takeaways. I'm in the takeaways brave and regular, but I'm just saying the actual materials that they use to wrap the product in that you then buy. I'm old enough, and don't think the Honourable Lady is, despite what she says, that I can remember the fish and chips in the newspaper and tell you it tasted great. But today's system doesn't allow that to happen. Some of the consumer companies, the takeaway companies, have come up with some ideas how to reduce the products that they use. I think if we were going to do something good, and I think the Chairman's looking at me, and I think this is what I would see as one of the important ones. If we want to do something really, really specific and great, we should be trying to look at methods whereby we can reduce the takeaway packaging. Because if we do that, it'll make a magnificent change and difference to the disposable market.
Yes, I completely agree, and there were some mentions in the report of takeaway. Now, of course, the other thing to do is to not have as many takeaways, because that's another thing that's changed in the last 20, 30 years. You know, we eat a lot more takeaway food, and it's not actually very good for us either. So there's many reasons, and not only the environment, but to cut out takeaway food to some degree, and to use more locally sourced products, and to cook yourself. You mentioned home economics. I myself had home economics. I can't say they were very successful, as my father said when I brought my rock cakes home. That's where he now understood where the name came from, and I haven't made a cake since. It was very harsh, but unfortunately it was very true. But recycling, so using less is the first thing, and making it easy for people to use less. Recycling is a major role to play. And, you know, we've all said this, we have to standardise. Even between my two homes, in London and in Petworth, what I can cycle, how I recycle it's completely different. I go back to my parents in Knowsley. Theirs is not only different, but almost the opposite of what I do at home in Petworth. So I'm always putting things in the wrong bin. Even just the colours and all of these things would be made so much easier. We've allowed every council to design it. And actually, I think what drives it is the design of the equipment that their local recycling centre, and what the equipment can do, and how it manages things like bottle tops and various bits of plastic. That actually has driven the standards just by what councils or local authorities invested in their recycling facilities. So we do need to, as part of the endeavours to increase recycling rates, the government has proposed a new tax system to ensure at least 30% of packaging is made from recycled material. And I do fully support this direction of travel. Although I also think the committee's recommendations to have a more modulated tax system may be more effective in incentivising a greater percentage of recycled material. And we talked about the deposit return scheme, and I remember when I was reading about this thinking that sounds almost exactly like what used to happen again many years ago. I remember the Alpine lemonade man coming round as a child, and you know there were glass bottles then. We used to collect the glass bottles. In fact, it was the only way we made any pocket money. And I think today's children, not only would they have the financial incentive to collect all of this plastic if they made some money out of it, there is not a single school that any of us go into that we are not asked about insects that are no longer around, that we never even knew existed. You know, they're so well educated on the environment, that I think that will be a generation. They are forcing already a generational change. But, you know, if I go into schools, we have a beach school at Chidham, one of my schools, and I'm going to actually ask them if they've done the sand experiment for our area. But we have forest schools. I go to schools in Southbourne, Siddlesham, Harton, Loxwood, Rake. They've all got eco-warriors. They've got eco-councils. And the questions are the hardest questions I get. I can talk about Brexit all day long, but some of these environmental questions they've studied to a much greater degree. I mean, we didn't do any of this in school, and you know now we're sort of struggling to catch up. And they really do have a fantastic approach, and I'm pretty sure that it would be they would, if they were incentivised with cash, make sure that they collected everything for deposit return schemes, because it is a good way of topping up your pocket money. So Chichester First Christchurch Brownies, they wrote to me recently to ask me to support their plastic promise, which of course I've agreed to do, and they aim to raise awareness of plastic pollution and to reduce our reliance on single plastic. So not only are they telling their parents what to do, they're telling their MPs what to do, which is very welcome. And in their letter, they were very excited by the deposit return scheme. They really welcomed it, and I can see them, you know, going around in their uniforms, picking up all the plastic and making some cash in the meantime, probably for good causes, because that will be another thing that children will get involved in. So I'd like to conclude, Chair, by also emphasising the importance of international cooperation in tackling this issue. Currently, of the estimated 8 million tonnes of plastics that enter the ocean each year, the US, UK and Europe collectively contribute about 2%. Therefore, the government's investment of over £60 million to help the Commonwealth nations improve their waste management is vital and is the right approach. And of course we have to show leadership, but as much as we can do to help other countries as well is going to make a massive impact. So I hope we can continue our domestic journey of self-improvement in this area. I believe it's the best way to instill change abroad is to lead by example at home. And I also look forward to seeing the technology and innovation that will rise to this challenge to make sure that we free our world from plastic pollution. Thank you very much.